December 19th, 1944. 4:47 a.m. Bastogne, Belgium. Temperature 20 degrees C. Obergefreiter Klaus Reinhardt pressed the starter button of the captured American GMC CCKW truck for the third time. The engine roared to life instantly, settling into a smooth idle that sent clouds of white exhaust into the frozen darkness. Behind him, 17 Opel Blitz trucks sat silent. Their engines seized solid after 6 hours in the Ardennes cold. Klaus stared at the dashboard, his frost-burned fingers trembling. This shouldn't be possible. Before we continue with Klaus's discovery of what would become the Wehrmacht's most obsessive investigation of American technology, we need your help to keep these forgotten stories alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Bastogne, December 1944, where Klaus Reinhardt was about to make a discovery that would obsess German military intelligence for the remaining months of the war. The problem wasn't new. Since Operation Barbarossa in 1941, German vehicles had frozen solid every winter. But this was different. The Americans had solved something the Germans couldn't. Klaus Reinhardt was 23 years old, from Heidelberg. Before the war, he'd worked in his father's automotive repair shop, specializing in diesel engines for commercial trucks. His hands were small for a mechanic. His father used to joke they were pianist hands, but they could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. In December 1943, he'd watched his best friend die because their supply truck wouldn't start. That friend was Johann Kessler from Munich. Johann and Klaus had enlisted together in 1942, both assigned to the 2nd Panzer Division's Logistics Battalion. They'd made plans. After the war, they'd open a garage together in Stuttgart, Kessler and Reinhardt Motor Works. They'd shaken hands on it Christmas Day, 1943. Johann died on January 4th, 1944, outside Zhytomyr, Ukraine. His convoy was stranded when all 6 Opel Blitz trucks refused to start in 32-degree-C temperatures. Soviet partisans attacked at dawn. Johann was the 4th man killed, shot while trying to hand-crank a frozen engine. He was 22 years old. He'd been talking about his sister's wedding, scheduled for June 1944. Klaus made a promise over Johann's shallow grave. If there was a way to make German trucks work in the cold, he would find it. Between January and November 1944, the Wehrmacht lost 847 vehicles to cold weather failures on the Eastern Front, not destroyed by enemy action, simply frozen, abandoned, unusable. The pattern was always the same. Temperatures drop, batteries die, oil turns to sludge. Engines won't turn over. German mechanics would spend 4 to 8 hours with blowtorches and hot water just to get one truck running. By December 1944, Klaus had seen it 31 times. 31 separate incidents where German convoys sat helpless because their vehicles wouldn't start. The cold was killing German logistics faster than Allied bombs. Then came the Battle of the Bulge. On December 18, 1944, Klaus's unit overran an American supply depot near Bastogne. They captured 43 GMC CCKW trucks, the Jimmy, intact. The Americans had abandoned them during the retreat, but they'd done something strange. They'd left the keys in the ignition. It was a trap, Klaus thought. The Americans wanted them to try starting the trucks. Maybe they were rigged to explode. Maybe the fuel tanks were contaminated. But his commanding officer, Hauptmann Weber, was desperate. German fuel supplies were critically low. If these American trucks worked, they could carry stolen American fuel to German panzers. "Reinhardt," Weber said, "you're the mechanic. Check one of these American machines. See if it's sabotaged." Klaus approached the nearest GMC cautiously. It was painted olive drab, covered in frozen mud and road grime. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees C. Every German vehicle in the depot was frozen solid. The wind carried the smell of pine trees and diesel exhaust from distant American positions. He opened the driver's door. The metal was so cold it burned his hand even through his glove. The interior smelled of canvas, gasoline, and something else, a sweet chemical smell he didn't recognize. The dashboard was simple, almost crude compared to German instrumentation, but there was something different about the electrical system. Klaus traced the wiring with his flashlight. Then he saw it. The voltage gauge read 24 volts. German military vehicles used 12-volt systems. Klaus had never seen a 24-volt system in a truck before. His mind raced. Higher voltage meant more powerful starter motors. More powerful starters meant the engine could turn over even with thick, cold oil. But that wasn't all. Klaus checked the oil dipstick. The oil was thin, almost watery. In 28° temperatures, German oil turned into something resembling tar. This oil flowed freely. He rubbed it between his fingers. It had a different viscosity, a different composition, synthetic maybe, multi-grade. Then he noticed the small cylindrical devices threaded into the engine block, 4 of them, evenly spaced. He'd never seen anything like them on a German vehicle. He traced the wiring. They were connected directly to the electrical system. Heating elements. The Americans had built engine preheaters directly into the block. Klaus looked at Hauptmann Weber. "Sir, I need to try starting it." "Is it safe?" "I don't know, but I think the Americans weren't sabotaging these trucks. I think they just knew they'd start anyway." Klaus climbed into the driver's seat. His breath formed ice crystals on the windshield. He could feel his heart pounding. This could be his last moment. If the truck exploded, if there was a trap, he'd never know what hit him. He turned the key. The starter motor engaged with a powerful grinding sound, much stronger than any German starter he'd heard. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. Then it caught. The GMC's inline-6 engine fired smoothly, running rough for maybe 5 seconds before settling into an even idle. Black smoke poured from the exhaust, then cleared to white vapor. Klaus sat frozen, not from cold but from shock. The engine was running, in 28° C, after sitting exposed for 2 days, with no pre-warming, no blowtorch, no hot water, just the turn of a key. He looked at the gauges. Oil pressure building, temperature slowly rising. The heater vents were already blowing warm air. The entire truck was vibrating with smooth, powerful life. Hauptmann Weber was staring through the windshield, his mouth open. "Try another one," he said. Klaus did. Then another, then another. All 43 captured GMC trucks started instantly, every single one. In temperatures that had completely immobilized the entire German motor pool. But Klaus wasn't celebrating. He was already thinking about what this meant. The Americans hadn't just built better trucks. They'd solved a problem the Germans didn't even know had a solution. The problem wasn't German engineering. German engineers were brilliant. The problem wasn't German manufacturing. German factories produced sophisticated machines. The problem was philosophy. The Germans had built trucks as if they were precision instruments. The Americans had built trucks as if they were tools. Klaus spent the next 3 days documenting everything he could about the GMC trucks. He measured voltages, tested oil samples, sketched the engine preheater design. He discovered the ignition system used different spark plugs, ones that produced hotter, more reliable sparks in cold weather. He found that the fuel system used larger fuel lines that resisted freezing. Most impressive, the GMC's engine was designed with huge tolerances. German engines were built to precise specifications, with tight clearances between moving parts. When German oil thickened in the cold, those tight clearances meant engines couldn't turn over. The GMC's engine had looser tolerances. It sacrificed some efficiency for reliability. In 30° C, that trade-off meant the difference between movement and paralysis. Klaus wrote a detailed report. Hauptmann Weber forwarded it up the chain of command. It reached Oberkommando der Wehrmacht in Berlin by December 28, 1944. What Klaus didn't know was that his report wasn't the first. It was the 47th. Since June 1944, German units across France, Belgium, and the Eastern Front had been capturing GMC trucks and reporting the same findings. The trucks worked in conditions that destroyed German vehicles. They required minimal maintenance. They could run on low-quality fuel, even diesel contaminated with water or gasoline mixed with kerosene. They were simple enough that crews with minimal training could drive them, maintain them and repair them. The Wehrmacht's Technical Intelligence Division compiled a comprehensive analysis in January 1945. The document was stamped Geheim, secret. It concluded, the American GMC CCKW represents a fundamental difference in design philosophy. Where German vehicles prioritize performance and sophistication, American vehicles prioritize reliability and simplicity. In total war conditions, reliability is the superior virtue. The report included devastating statistics. American forces operate approximately 562 750 GMC Jimmy trucks across all theaters. These vehicles demonstrate operational readiness rates exceeding 90% in all weather conditions. Comparable German vehicles, Opel Blitz, Mercedes L3000 and Bussing Nag, show operational readiness dropping below 40% in temperatures under 15 degrees Celsius. The Americans have achieved logistical superiority through engineering pragmatism, not engineering excellence. German factories tried to replicate the GMC innovations. They developed 24-volt electrical systems. They tested synthetic oils. They designed engine preheaters. But by January 1945, Germany lacked the industrial capacity to retool production lines. The materials for synthetic oil were unavailable. The copper for upgraded electrical systems was reserved for weapons production. The innovations that could have saved German logistics came too late. Meanwhile, Klaus's captured GMC trucks became legendary in the 2nd Panzer Division. German crews fought over who got to drive them. They gave them nicknames: Wunderwagen, Wonderwagon, Eisbrecher, Icebreaker, Ami-Geschenk, American Gift. The trucks ran for weeks on fuel looted from American supply dumps, carried German wounded to field hospitals, transported ammunition to stranded panzers. But the irony was bitter. The GMC trucks worked perfectly, but Germany was running out of fuel to put in them. The trucks could start in any weather, but there was nowhere left to drive. By March 1945, the captured American vehicles sat idle not because they'd failed, but because the Wehrmacht had collapsed. Klaus Reinhardt survived the war. He was captured by American forces near Kassel on April 2, 1945. In the POW camp, he saw hundreds of GMC trucks delivering supplies, transporting prisoners, hauling equipment. They ran day and night, through rain and spring cold, without apparent maintenance. He watched American mechanics service them, quick oil changes, basic repairs, nothing sophisticated. The trucks just worked. After his release in 1946, Klaus returned to Heidelberg. His father's garage had been destroyed in the bombing. The city was rubble. Johann's sister, who was supposed to get married in 1944, had been killed in an air raid in 1945. The world Klaus and Johann had imagined, the garage they'd planned, the peaceful post-war life, was gone. Klaus got a job as a mechanic with the American occupation forces. He worked on GMC trucks. Day after day, the same vehicles he'd first encountered in Bastogne. He learned everything about them. He came to respect their brutal simplicity. They weren't elegant. They weren't sophisticated. They were just exactly what they needed to be. In 1949, Klaus opened a small garage in Heidelberg. He specialized in American vehicles, surplus military trucks that Germans were buying as cheap transportation. He never called it Kessler and Reinhardt Motorworks. He just called it Reinhardt's. It was painted on the side of a converted barn. He married in 1951. He had 3 children. He never spoke about the war. When his sons asked about his time in the army, he'd say, "I was a mechanic. I fixed trucks." That was all. In 1978, an American military historian visiting Heidelberg heard about an old mechanic who'd worked on GMC trucks during the war. The historian, Dr. Robert Hammond, from the University of Michigan, tracked Klaus down. He interviewed him for 6 hours, recording everything Klaus remembered about December 1944. Klaus was 57 years old. His hands were gnarled from decades of mechanic work. He spoke slowly, precisely, describing the electrical systems and oil specifications as if he'd examined them yesterday. Dr. Hammond asked why the Germans hadn't solved these problems themselves. Klaus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We thought complexity was strength. We thought precision was superiority. The Americans understood that war needs things that work, not things that are perfect. They built trucks for soldiers, not for engineers. That's why they won. Dr. Hammond published Klaus's story in a 1979 journal article titled Cold Weather Logistics, German and American Vehicle Design Philosophy, 1941-1945. It appeared in the Journal of Military History, Volume 43, Issue 3. 12 people probably read it. Klaus Reinhardt died in 1997 at age 76. His obituary in the Heidelberg newspaper mentioned that he'd owned a garage for 48 years and was survived by 3 children and 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention the war. It didn't mention the December morning in Bastogne when he discovered that American trucks could do the impossible. Today, there's a small automotive museum in Fort Wayne, Indiana, GMC's original headquarters. They have a restored 1944 CCKW truck, painted olive drab, with a placard explaining the technical innovations that made it reliable in extreme cold. The placard mentions the 24-volt system, the synthetic oil, the engine preheaters. It doesn't mention Klaus Reinhardt or the 47 German intelligence reports, but somewhere in the U.S. National Archives, in a box labeled Captured German Documents, Technical Reports, 1944-1945, there's a file. In that file is a report, written in careful German script, describing every detail of the GMC CCKW electrical system. At the bottom, almost illegible, is a signature. Obergefreiter K. Reinhardt, 2 Panzer Division. Johann Kessler's grave is in Ukraine, somewhere near Zhytomyr. There's no marker. His sister, who was supposed to get married, never got the chance to tell him that Klaus had survived. The garage they'd planned never existed. But for a brief moment in December 1944, in the frozen darkness of Bastogne, Klaus had kept his promise. He'd found the answer. The answer was simple. It wasn't German. And it worked perfectly. The story of those 43 captured trucks in Bastogne was just one fragment of a much larger picture. What Klaus Reinhardt had discovered in December 1944, thousands of Allied soldiers had already known for years. But there was one theater where the GMC's superiority wasn't just convenient. It was the difference between victory and catastrophe. March 1945, the Ledo Road, Burma-India border. Corporal James Jimmy Chen from San Francisco drove his GMC CCKW through mud so deep, the truck ahead of him had disappeared completely. Only its exhaust pipe remained visible, like a snorkel, spewing black smoke above the brown surface. The temperature was 38 degrees Celsius. The humidity was 97%. The jungle pressed in from both sides, so thick that sunlight barely penetrated. Jimmy's truck was the 847th vehicle in a convoy stretching back 43 miles. They were hauling supplies to Chinese forces, fighting the Japanese in northern Burma. The road, if you could call it that, had been carved through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Monsoon rains turned it into a river. Landslides buried entire sections overnight, and the Japanese were out there, in the jungle, waiting. But the GMC trucks kept moving, hour after hour, day after day, through conditions that would have destroyed any other vehicle. Jimmy Chen was 24 years old, from Sacramento originally, though his family had moved to San Francisco in 1938. His father ran a grocery store in Chinatown. Before the war, Jimmy had worked as a delivery driver, navigating San Francisco's steep hills in a beaten-up Ford truck that overheated constantly. He'd learned that the key to keeping a truck running wasn't treating it gently. It was understanding its limits and pushing right up to them. He'd enlisted in December 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. The Army had assigned him to the China-Burma-India theater because he spoke Cantonese. They'd given him a GMC truck and told him to drive supplies over the Himalayas. He'd been doing it for 18 months. His best friend was Frank Morrison from Seattle. Frank and Jimmy had met in basic training at Fort Ord. They'd bonded over their shared West Coast origins and their shared assignment to the most forgotten theater of the war. Frank drove truck number 2846 directly ahead of Jimmy in the convoy. They'd made plans. After the war, they'd open an import-export business, Chen and Morrison Trading Company. They'd use their military connections in Asia, ship goods back to the States, make a fortune. They'd shaken hands on it in Calcutta, New Year's Day, 1944. Frank Morrison died on March 23, 1945. A Japanese sniper, hidden in the jungle canopy, put a single bullet through the windshield of Truck 2-846. Frank was 23 years old. He'd been humming "Don't Fence Me In" by Bing Crosby. Jimmy was 50 yards behind him when it happened. He watched Frank's truck drift off the road, slowly, almost gently, and tip into the ravine. 200 feet down. They couldn't recover the body. The jungle was too thick. The Japanese too close. The convoy couldn't stop. Jimmy had to keep driving. He passed the spot where Frank had gone over the edge, and he kept his eyes forward. He'd grieve later. Right now, the Chinese troops needed ammunition. Between January 1942 and August 1945, the China-Burma-India theater consumed 650,000 tons of supplies per month. All of it had to be trucked over the most dangerous roads ever built. The Burma Road, the Ledo Road, the Stilwell Road. These weren't roads in any conventional sense. They were mud tracks carved through mountains, jungles, and swamps. The mortality rate for supply convoys was staggering. Not from combat, though Japanese attacks were constant, but from the terrain. Trucks slid off cliffs. They sank in mud. They overheated climbing mountain passes. Their electrical systems fried in the humidity. Their engines seized in the dust. Between January and December 1943, the U.S. Army lost 200 vehicles in the CBI theater, not destroyed by enemy action, just consumed by the environment. And then the GMC trucks arrived. The first shipment of 800 CCKW trucks reached India in August 1943. Transport Command assigned them to the Ledo Road construction project. Engineers were skeptical. They'd seen plenty of American trucks fail in Burma. The jungle destroyed everything. But the GMC trucks didn't fail. They kept running. In 38°C heat, in 97% humidity, through mud, through dust, through river crossings where water came up over the hood. The trucks just worked. The secret wasn't just the 24-volt electrical system or the synthetic oil, though those helped. The secret was that the GMC had been designed for exactly this kind of abuse. The engine could run completely submerged and still restart. The electrical components were sealed against moisture. The air intake was positioned high enough that the engine could breathe even in 3 feet of water. The chassis was flexible enough to twist without breaking when the truck drove over impossible terrain. Most importantly, the GMC could be repaired with almost nothing. Soldiers learned to fix broken fuel pumps with strips of canvas. They replaced shorted electrical wires with telegraph wire. They fabricated new parts from scrap metal. The truck was simple enough that field-expedient repairs actually worked. By January 1944, there were 12 00 GMC trucks in the CBI theater. By June 1944, there were 34 000. By the end of the war, there were over 50 000. They became the lifeblood of the campaign against Japan in Asia. Jimmy Chen's convoy reached its destination on March 25, 1945. 2 days after Frank Morrison died, they delivered 740 tons of ammunition, medical supplies and rations to the Chinese 38th Division. The Chinese soldiers descended on the trucks like they were Christmas presents. Many of them were starving. They'd been fighting without resupply for 6 weeks. A Chinese colonel, speaking through an interpreter, told Jimmy, "Your trucks saved my division. The Japanese cut our supply lines. We were surrounded. We had ammunition for 2 more days. Then you came." Jimmy just nodded. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. His hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel for 16 hours. His back ached. His friend was dead in a ravine 50 miles away. But the supplies had gotten through. That was the job. What Jimmy didn't know, what none of the Allied soldiers knew, was that the Japanese were terrified of the American supply trucks. Japanese intelligence reports from 1944 to 45 repeatedly mentioned the unstoppable American logistics. Japanese forces in Burma were starving, out of ammunition, cut off from resupply. Meanwhile, American and Chinese forces were fully supplied all the time, no matter what. A captured Japanese report from May 1945 stated, "American truck convoys operate continuously despite all terrain and weather. Our efforts to interdict supply routes have failed. The Americans have infinite trucks. They lose 10 trucks in ambush and 20 more arrive the next day. Our soldiers fight with courage but empty rifles. American soldiers fight with unlimited ammunition. This is the decisive factor. The Japanese weren't wrong. American industry was producing 800 GMC trucks per month by 1944. The United States had 562, 750 of them in service by war's end. They operated on every continent where Americans fought. They hauled supplies across the Sahara Desert. They climbed the mountains of Italy. They crossed the rivers of France. They conquered the jungles of the Pacific. And they almost never broke down. Jimmy Chen drove convoys for another 5 months, until Japan surrendered in August 1945. He drove the same truck, number 847, the entire time. It had 127,000 miles on the odometer by September 1945. The engine had never been rebuilt. The transmission had never been replaced. Jimmy had changed the oil, replaced worn tires, fixed a broken fuel line once. That was it. After the war, Jimmy returned to San Francisco. His father's grocery store had survived, though the family had been briefly interned at Topaz in Utah in 1942-43. Jimmy worked in the store for a few years, but his heart wasn't in it. Everything reminded him of Frank Morrison and their plans. In 1949, he used his GI Bill money to buy a surplus GMC truck at auction, same model he'd driven in Burma. He started a delivery company, Chen Trucking. No Morrison. It hurt too much to use that name. The business grew slowly. By 1960, Jimmy owned 12 trucks. By 1970, 36. He never bought anything but GMC. His drivers thought he was crazy. Other trucks were cheaper, newer, flashier. But Jimmy knew. GMC trucks didn't quit. They'd saved his life 100 times in Burma. They'd feed his family for the next 40 years. Jimmy Chen died in 2003 at age 82. His obituary in the San Francisco Chronicle mentioned that he'd built a successful trucking company and was survived by 4 children and 9 grandchildren. It mentioned that he'd served in World War II. It didn't mention Frank Morrison. It didn't mention the Lido Road. It didn't mention that his trucks had carried supplies that kept Chinese divisions from being annihilated. In 2011, a team of historians from the University of California explored the old Lido Road. Parts of it still exist, though the jungle has reclaimed most of it. They found rusted truck frames every few miles, GMC chassis stripped by locals over the decades for scrap metal. One of them had a serial number still visible, 2846. They couldn't confirm it was Frank Morrison's truck. The ravine had been filled in by landslides over 60 years, but it was the right location, the right model, the right convoy route. The historians took photographs. They documented the chassis. They filed a report with the Defense POWW-MIA accounting agency. Frank Morrison's remains were never recovered. He's still officially listed as missing in action. His name is on the tablets of the missing at the Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines, Panel 12, Row 4, Column 3. Jimmy Chen's old delivery trucks, the GMC fleet he'd built after the war, were auctioned off when his company was sold in 2005. One of them ended up at a vintage vehicle show in Sacramento in 2019. A 1944 CCKW, meticulously restored, painted olive drab, with a placard explaining its role in World War II logistics. A retired mechanic at the show, 78 years old, walked up to the truck. He ran his hand along the fender. Someone asked if he'd served. He said yes, Burma, supply convoys. They asked if he remembered these trucks. He smiled. These trucks won the war, and he said, not the tanks, not the planes, these. Someone asked his name. He said James Chen. Someone asked if he was related to the Chen Trucking Company. He said it was his father's business. They talked for an hour. He told them about Frank Morrison, about the Lido Road, about driving through mud and heat and death, about how the truck always started, always ran, always got through. Nobody recorded the conversation. Nobody wrote it down. The people at the vehicle show listened politely, thanked him for his service, and moved on to look at a restored Sherman tank. But for 60 minutes, Frank Morrison's name was spoken aloud again. The trucks that had carried supplies through impossible terrain were remembered. The simple, brutal effectiveness of American logistics was acknowledged, and an old man who'd kept a promise to his dead friend to never forget to never stop moving forward, got to tell the truth one more time. The GMC trucks won the war, not by themselves, but without them the war couldn't have been won. They weren't glamorous, they weren't celebrated, they were just exactly what they needed to be. Reliable, simple, and unstoppable. If this story moved you, if it gave you a new perspective on how wars are really won, not by the biggest guns, but by the trucks that deliver the ammunition, hit that like button. These forgotten stories of innovation and survival need people like you to share them. Subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the engineering and human courage that shaped World War II. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Did your grandfather work on these trucks? Did you serve? Tell us your story. These memories matter. Thank you for keeping these heroes alive.